Hey, dear friends, Patrick here. Chapter 5, reviewing Richard Dawkins' book, The Greatest Show on Earth. Chapter 5 is called Before Our Very Eyes. This is a very long chapter, almost 30 pages, tons of biobabble, you know, really trying to baffle the reader with BS, as they say. He tries to use the metaphor of a detective, which really fails. We found out in the last chapter that you cannot use radioactive dating for fossils because there are no fossils in igneous rock. So that's important to remember. In this one, he starts off by talking about tusks of elephants and, saying that the size of the tusks have gone down in size. But he never mentions that it's probably due to the fact they're measuring over time the average weight of the tusks that they find from these Ugandan elephants, and he graphs it out in this little chart. And he says that this is probably an evolutionary trend because of the hunting from poaching, but he never mentions that they're probably not finding and measuring over time elephants with bigger tusks because those have been poached, right? He's saying that the ones that they're finding and measuring are because they're adapting to this evolutionary trend, which is really idiotic. He says here on page 113, I'm inclined to take seriously the possibility that is a true evolutionary trend, which is an idiotic statement because he doesn't even consider that the poachers are obviously going to take the largest tusks, and whatever is left to measure is smaller tusks, right? There could be just as many large Ugandan elephants with tusks in 1960 as there was in 1925, but they're not finding them to measure them. Hello? Anyway, I'll let him have that for now. Let's move on. Again, this is a long-winded chapter with lots of data. He goes on to talk about, he mentions on page 115, saying the cecum, it's kind of like a part of your large intestine, spelled CAECUM. I think that's how you pronounce it. And he says, our appendix is a vestige of the larger cecum in our more vegetarian ancestors. How does he know that? Right? He just throws that out there. This is a vestige of when we were vegetarians. He doesn't know that. It could have its own special purpose, just like the appendix could have its own special purpose, but half the time they pull it out without any negative effects, I guess. Pardon me, sorry. Just having a little Java there to keep me going. But anyway, yeah, he talks about all this stuff, and he talks about things happening, and he says it all happened so rapidly, a matter of a few decades. Evolution before our eyes, he proclaims. Once again, what's his name there? John Lovitz. Acting, evolution, it happens. He's the Pathological Liars Association, I think here. Idiotic natural adaptation is his definition of evolution. He makes this weird statement on page 117. Imagine if we could bring Lucy, the magnificent pre-human fossil discovered by Don Johansen, back to life from a deep freeze and set her kind evolving anew. What kind of person sick in the head would say that? They're going to find this old fossil, bring it back to life, and then, start examining evolution again. And then he said, these experiments that Lenski did all these experiments with bacteria, right? And he was following over many generations of bacteria, how they change and all that. And he says these experiments are distressing to creationists. I bet most creationists don't even care about these experiments, but he's presenting a strongman here. They are a beautiful demonstration of evolution in action, something that is hard to laugh off, even when your motivation to do so is very strong. I'm not going to try and laugh off something. If I hear about something, I want to listen to it and understand it. But this is his gaslighting. This is his belittling. This is his ridiculing of creationists, right? It's really a jerk statement to do that. Um, as Richard Lenski says, he gushes over Richard Lenski. He thinks he's just the greatest, you know. There's a lot of opportunity for evolution. And then here, so Lenski did these lab experiments with bacteria, replicating the generations over and over and over again, and they analyzed their studies, right? So he says he's going to talk about his work, right, in chapter 5. And so listen what he says here to introduce Lenski's work. He says, Lenski and his colleagues did this work in a lab in a very thorough, careful way and detail. The details contribute to the impact of the evidence for evolution. And these experiments provide that therefore I'm not going to stint in explaining them. So he wants to explain them in detail. This means that the next few pages are inevitably somewhat intricate, not difficult, just intricately detailed. It would probably be best not to read this section of the book when tired at the end of a long day. Like, what an arrogant, statement to make to the reader, right? Just insufferably pompous, right? To say, oh, this is going to be so complicated. Don't read this when you're tired. Yeah, it's complicated, all right. It's boring. Boring, boring, boring. 2,000 generations of bacteria. And he's saying how brilliantly conceived this series of experiments is. All these tribes, of different bacteria, and they're tracking them and all that. It's boring. Boring, boring, boring. And for him, he thinks it's the greatest thing ever because, he thinks Lenski's research is such a class act. He's so excited about it. Oh, good for you. He says here, I won't speculate on this from page 124 on why increasing body size might be an advantage. There are many possibilities, but it looks as though it must have been so because all 12 tribes did it. He just says this must be evolution. This must be natural selection. What if God is allowing these creatures to adapt by the divine intelligence that is embedded in every single life form? What if all Lenski's experiments are just another example of the magnificent intelligence of God allowing bacteria to adapt to their environment on a tiny scale, just like elephants adapt to their environment on a large scale? But he says, no, this is evolution. Yeah, look at this. Humans were once fish, and the fish turned into humans. There's no God. Everything comes back to the same thing, his same argument. Make fun of creationists, get rid of God, and support it with his own assumptions, saying, this is evolution. Yeah, there's no God involved. The odds of this happening by chance are stupefyingly large. But then he won't apply that to the very first cell that was ever came to be, right? I know that one of the arguments of creation is that for a cell to form out of nothing when there was no life on Earth, apparently there was no life on Earth at one time, and then the first cell just magically appeared. He says, he's talking about this particular scientific study in a lab, talking about 59 different genes independently would completely beggar belief, he says. The odds against this happening by chance are stupefyingly large. Well, so is the creation of the first cells. You can't have it both ways. You can't use that argument to argue for your lab experiments unless you apply it to the first cell appearing out of nothing, which is what you're doing here. Anyway, this is exactly the kind of thing creationists say cannot happen because they think it is too improbable to have happened by chance. Yet it actually happened. No, creationists are talking about the creation of the first cell out of nothing with all its working parts and all this that you said just had to have occurred. But he's gaslighting creationists by turning the argument around and saying, you're saying it didn't happen by chance. Yes, it did happen. It did happen by chance, right? So his arguments run in circles. He uses circular reasoning to support his versions of evolution, but makes fun of creationists and says that they're the ones that are using circular reasoning. He says, we've seen a beautiful demonstration of evolution in action, evolution before our very eyes. This is from page 126, documented by comparing 12 independent lines and also comparing each line with living fossils, which literally, instead of only metaphorically, come from the past. So, he's saying this is evolution in action, that all this work with bacteria that this guy Lenski did. If you want to study it and believe it, great. See, again, he says 128 on page 128. There's another theoretical possibility, an extremely tantalizing one. This is where the story gets quite complicated. So if it's late at night, might be an idea to resume reading tomorrow. What an insufferable, arrogant prick to belittle the reader and say, this might be too difficult for you to handle because this is so complex, right? And we're looking for something like irreducible complexity of creationist propaganda. Again, at the bottom of page 128, he tries to make fun of creationists at every turn. And then after all this research, he says, this moments of great joy in scientific research, and this must have been one of them. Just a stupid comment. And he says, creationists hate it. Creationists hate this research. What creationists hate this research? You're not mentioning anybody's name. You're just saying, this blanket statement, creationists hate it. I don't hate it. You want to study bacteria? Spend your life studying bacteria to prove something to yourself? Go ahead. I don't hate it. I don't really care about it. And I'm a creationist. I believe God created life. Does that make me a creationist? I guess it does, right? He says there's new information entering genomes without the intervention of a designer. Says who? Says who there was no intervention of a designer if there's new information entering genomes? Just because you didn't see the designer in your lab experiments? You're dealing with life forms. How do you know that the power of God is not operating in those life forms? That if you remove the power of God away from life, that there is no life? You don't know that. It's crazy that you would say that. But go ahead, say whatever you want. You see, he says, it seems like these bacteria are clever. He's admitting on page 132 that there seems to be an intelligence in even basic life forms such as bacteria. It seems to be an intelligence there that is unseen. But he says, any fool can see that it is not plausible to describe a bacterium as clever. If there were clever bacteria, why would stopping prematurely make any difference to the learning? Blah, 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 blah. He goes on, right? And he finishes his thought process on 133 to teach something of the one. He says this research shows the wondrous power of natural selection. See, you could say the wondrous power of nature, the wondrous power of God, the wondrous power of life. But he says, no, the wondrous power of natural selection. He has to attribute any of this marvelous adaptations that life forms are able to make. He has to attribute that to evolution or natural selection or both, so that he can avoid mentioning anything about the wonderful power of God's life force, God's intelligence. He says it seems like these bacteria are clever, but we know that can't be possible. So it has to be the wondrous power of natural selection, right? Thespian, the greatest. If you haven't watched John Lovett's skit about the greatest actor that ever lived, I recommend you check it out. Maybe I'll put a link to it because it makes me laugh every time I think about it. For some reason, it reminds me of Dawkins. Evolution, natural selection. I better finish this video up. I'm going over time. So he goes on and on. I did some more notes in this chapter, but I'm not going to go into them too much. He's always saying how delighted he is with these discoveries, right? And it's like you can almost hear him cackling with glee. Oh, this is so wonderful because this supports my argument of evolution, and it gives me something else to make fun of creationists, right? We're talking about guppies adapting under natural selection, of course, not by God's wisdom. It's a spectacular example of evolution before our very eyes. What an idiotic statement he makes on page 139. Just nuts. I made a note here that animals are inconsiderate enough to evolve at different rates. It might even be inconsiderate enough not to evolve at all. So he says, animals evolve, so fish turned into humans, but some animals don't evolve at all. What? What did you just say on the top of page 141? It says animals are inconsiderate enough to evolve at different rates, so some animals evolve fast, some animals evolve slowly. Okay, that sounds reasonable. And might even be inconsiderate enough not to evolve at all. Oh, wait a minute now. So there's some life forms like these clams that haven't changed in a gazillion years. They were a clam a gazillion years ago, and they're still a clam today. I got it. Okay, so you're admitting that on the top of page 141. Some creatures don't evolve at all. Oh, but these other creatures that you found in a lab, these bacteria, they evolved through these generations, and fish evolved into a human. That's what you're saying in your book. You get to hold all the cards. You get to say whatever you want. You say, oh, some creatures evolve, some don't, and some evolve this way, some evolve faster, some evolve slower. But it's all natural selection. It's all evolution, right? As long as God's not involved, and as long as he can make fun of the creationists, that's all that matters in his writing. He doesn't say, well, you know what? We have a problem here. These clams never evolved. They never changed. They were a clam a gazillion years ago, and they're a clam today. So what's the problem there? How come they're not experiencing any kind of evolution whatsoever? How do you know that that's not the same for humans, that humans weren't humans a gazillion years ago, and they're, oh, but we have fossils that we found. No, you didn't. You can't carbon date any kind of fossil of a human skeleton because there are none of a gazillion years ago, right? You can't have it both ways. You can find a skeleton from 100,000 years old if you want to call it that. But he covers all the bases. See, evolution, the catch-all for the complexity and variety of nature that was created and sustained by God, right? We're told that. We know that from Scripture, right? God cares about the sparrow. It doesn't fall to the ground without his knowledge. Why are not all the guppies wiped out? There's new species to replace the old ones. New species are being created all the time by God. That's my argument, that God is involved at all kinds of steps. If God wants to allow a creature to evolve, to adapt to its environment, he'll allow it. If it's not necessary to evolve, it doesn't evolve, right? Evolution is not by Dawkins' own admission, evolution is not this universal thing that all creatures are subject to. By his own admission, keep in mind, there are some creatures that do not evolve at all. So the problem with that argument is that if they don't evolve at all, how did it start? If a clam was a clam a gazillion years ago, it didn't start off as a little insect, like he would say. It didn't start off as a little cell and then evolve into a clam and then just stop. Okay, it evolved into a clam and then just stopped and then stayed a clam forever. That's his argument. It has to be his argument. He doesn't say it. But it had to experience evolution to become a clam because all life, according to him, came from a single cell, right? You see the problem that he runs into in his own reasoning and arguing? I got these Beelzebubs after me, these flies. Lord of the Flies is starting to get bothered by Dawkins' arguments failing all around his ears. Anyway, I've gone on way too long on this video. That's chapter 5. It's a very long-winded chapter and tedious. But if you have to study this book for school or for whatever reason, almost got that fly, then I say that I feel very sorry for you. But God bless you. Thank you for watching. Once again, that's finished part 5. Next video will address part 6. God loves you very much. Don't worry about this evolution stuff. God is behind it all. He can create life. He can cause life to transform from a caterpillar into a butterfly if he wants, or he can make a life remain unchanged for a gazillion years like a clam. God controls it all, right? We don't know whether we came from fish or not. We don't know whether we evolved or we've been humans for as long as recorded history. We don't know that, right? But Dawkins insists that we came from fish and then turned into humans, and he says that it's all through an unthinking, unfeeling, inert universe that has nothing to do with God. So take your pick. God bless you. Thank you for watching. We'll talk to you again real soon. Bye for now.